Hello everyone and welcome to our third webinar on IoT regulations, this time dedicated to MENA's IoT policy and regulations. We are very happy to welcome you. I'm in Brussels with my colleague Veronica, my colleague Motassem is in Jordan, we have Mohamed in Egypt and Salma and Jean-Pierre joining us from Bahrain. So before we start, just a few information about the platform we will be using. So you can type your questions during the entire webinar in the questions tab, and you can also download some documentation, including the slides that will be presented in the handout tab. After the webinar, you will also have a very short feedback survey that we really encourage you to fill in, especially that you will be doing a good action, because for every feedback we receive, as usual now, you know the drill, we will plant a tree for each feedback we receive. And also it's very important for us for future events. And that's it for me today. I will now pass the floor to my colleague Veronica, and I will be back for the questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Welcome, everyone. Hello. Thank you so much for joining our today's webinar. My name is Veronica Bakarova. I am the head of regulatory trainings at Cullen International, and I'm truly pleased to be the host of today's webinar. For those of you not familiar with Cullen International, just to say that we are the leading regulatory intelligence provider, striving to make telecoms, media, digital, postal regulation simple for our clients, simple for our stakeholders. Our vision is to inspire better regulation for a better world. And since 1986, over 40 years, we've been doing so by providing relevant, timely, neutral information on regulatory developments across the sectors we cover and across Europe, Americas, MENA, and APAC regions. In 2024, as a part of our portfolio, we introduced a dedicated Internet of Things regulatory intelligence service, which covers 65 countries worldwide. The scope of the research has been focused on a range of relevant regulatory topics on Internet of Things developments, covering authorization, licensing regimes, permanent roaming, numbering, SIM registration requirements. We are also now looking into other aspects covering data protection, cross-border data transfer, eSIM regulations, satellite IoT. So to highlight the findings of our IoT research and to discuss IoT policies and regulations with the key stakeholders, we've been organizing the series of these webinars. As Sarah has already mentioned, this is the third in the series of webinars. The two previous ones were focused on Europe, where we looked at the European regulations ahead of the proposals for the Digital Networks Act by European Commission. And today we are going to discuss how IoT regulation and policy are evolving across Middle East and North Africa, and how different jurisdictions are approaching those challenges. So without further ado, I would like to welcome to our today's speakers. And today with us, we have my colleague, Motassem Karadin, our head of Middle East and North Africa research. Motassem has been with Cullen International since 2016. He leads our research across the region. And before joining Cullen International, Motassem has worked for Telecommunications Regulatory Commission in Jordan and also Jordanian Competition Authority. Then as one of our invited speakers, we have Mohamed Abdelhani Abdelhalim, Executive Director for Mobile Infrastructure Development at the National Regulatory Authority of Egypt. Mohamed brings 18 years of experience in telecommunications infrastructure development and radio spectrum management, and he often presents his country and multiple international bodies, including ITU, African Telecommunications Union, Arab Spectrum Management Group. Then joining us today, we have Jean-Pierre Sherry, who is General Counsel at Telecom Regulatory Authority of Bahrain. Jean-Pierre is a qualified UK lawyer originating from Malta, and he spent over 25 years in technology, media, IT sector regulation across a number of jurisdictions, including Europe, UK, Central Europe, Middle East. Over the past 12 years, he's been working for Bahrain Telecommunications Regulatory Authority, and he's been involved for several strategically important initiatives at the regulator. And together with Jean-Pierre, we also have Salma Hesham Al-Hashemi, who is the Manager of Regulatory Affairs, also at Telecoms Regulatory Authority Bahrain. And just like Jean-Pierre, Salma is also UK qualified solicitor, and she has over 6 years experience at TRA Bahrain with the focus on competition, consumer protection, regulatory enforcement aspects. So thank you so much again for joining us today. And now I would like just to let my colleague Muatasem to set the scene and to share with us some of the highlights from Cullen research on IoT before we move further to discussion with our participants. Muatasem, over to you.
Thank you, Veronica. I would like to start by thanking our valued guests, Mohammed from NETFA, Salma and Jean-Pierre from TRA Bahrain, for joining us to share their views and their thoughts on the IoT regulations in the Middle East and North Africa region. And also I would like to thank the attendees who take the time to join us also today. I'm so pleased to get the chance to talk about the IoT regulation in the Middle East and North Africa countries. In these countries, there is a wide range of unique and interesting approaches that have been used to regulate the IT services. Can we move to the next slide? Yes. So, yes, today we'll simply go through the main approaches of regulation of IoT services, explore countries who adopted IoT-specific regulations, and also the main regulatory aspects that are tackled that are related to IoT services and tackled in IoT regulations. Next slide, please. Okay. So first, I would like to highlight that the IoT service itself is a bit complicated. It's not a single service. The IoT in general is something like an comprehensive ecosystem. It includes many components and is provided by a chain of suppliers, not only one supplier. For instance, IoT services include devices, connectivity, data storage capacities and processing of data, and interfaces for devices and users. The components that provide the IoT service together are provided not only by one supplier, it's provided by a chain of suppliers. Each supplier of this chain perform a specific role and a range of activities that together form the IoT service. In general, those activities in many countries, or almost in all countries, if we take them one part by one, they are subject to regulatory requirements, general regulatory requirements. For example, the devices must be approved by the or comply with the standards that are set out in each country by the relevant authorities. The connectivity is also subject to regulatory obligations issued by the telecommunication laws or by the telecom regulators. Data storage and data processing must follow the cloud regulations, the general cloud regulations, and data protection rules in each country. In general, IoT services are subject to general regulatory frameworks related to each component of the service. However, in the MENA region, some countries paid more attention to IoT services. And in some of them, the relevant authorities, in most of the cases are the telecom regulators, adopted IoT-specific regulations that applies only to IoT services. Um, the main role of yes, not the same side. Sorry, Sarah. Yes, the main things that are like covered in these regulations, or the target of these regulations, is to explain and put together the regulatory requirements applied to IT services, such as if the service requires to use scarce resources, like the numbers or the radio spectrum, then it might require an authorization from telecom regulators. Uh, some regulations like explains how to provide these services, and in the same way avoid such requirements. The second thing is to impose additional and specific requirements on IoT services. For example, some regulations impose additional requirements related to use of IoT devices and special rules to protect IoT consumers. Actually, this is something similar to what we do in Colin International. We put everything together in one place, not only from one country, but from all the countries that we cover, and our researchers, to make the life of the stakeholders and the IoT provider much easier. Next slide, please. Yes, and in our coverage, we cover 13 countries in the Middle East and North Africa region. Out of those 13 countries, 7 countries adopted IoT-specific regulations. As I mentioned earlier, most of them are adopted by telecoms regulators, and they focus more in the connectivity part of the IoT service. However, in some countries, different authorities also issue IoT-specific regulations. I can recall that in UAE, the Cybersecurity Council issued a cybersecurity policy for IoT services. Just to make it clear, the countries that has not adopted IoT regulatory frameworks, specific frameworks, they are still regulating the IoT services under the general regulatory frameworks that applies to all services and all kind of activities in the country. Next slide, please. As we mentioned, most of the regulations come from telecoms regulators, like our esteemed guests from TRA and TATRA. The telecom regulators did a great job in explaining what trigger an authorization requirement for an IoT service. Moreover, some countries issued special licenses for and authorizations for IoT and IoT connectivity providers. Also, the IoT regulations set out rules and requirements for the use of numbering and radio spectrum resources, set out security requirements related to services, to IT service itself, the devices, and the use of devices as well, and the data that are collected from the IoT systems. And also, in some regulations, they have some requirements related to devices, but in most of regulations, it's like explains that the devices should be in line and comply with the standards for the devices, for the IT devices or for the devices in general. Such rules usually are in the type approval and in the device approvals regulations. This is like a general overview of the regulatory scene in the MENA region, and next we will discuss in more details on like specific topics. And
thank you.
Back to you, Viron.
Thank you, Muatasem. So yeah, it's a great introduction. As you can see, Both authorities that we have the pleasure to host in this webinar, Bahrain and Egypt, have adopted their regulatory approaches to IoT fairly recently. The National Telecommunications Authority of Egypt issued its first regulatory framework on IoT in January 2022, and Bahrain shortly after in February 2023. But the approaches, however they've been issued very close in time to each other, they differ on quite many aspects. And this is what I would like to discuss today. And I would let our speakers to provide us a little bit more background on some policy considerations, on the scope of those frameworks, of those approaches. And I will start perhaps with you, Salma, as you have some slides, just to give us a bit of intro to Bahrain's approach and what aspects are covered and what is the role of the TRA ultimately when it comes to IoT regulations and policies.
Sure. Okay. Let me just. Right, so I'll just give you an overview of Bahrain's stance on IoT and more specifically what our position is here at the TRA. So as IoTs developed rapidly, the TRA wanted to support investments and innovation while ensuring that existing regulatory objectives were still being met. So we recognized that IoT providers would need to navigate multiple legal and regulatory frameworks in Bahrain, and that would create some uncertainty. So we published the position paper, which basically acts as a single reference point, and it points you to the existing laws and regulations we have in Bahrain that already apply to IoT services. So the aim was just to make it easier for providers to operate in Bahrain without introducing, regulatory burdens. So clarifying the IoT's regulatory landscape, one of the most important steps was clearly distinguishing between IoT services and the connectivity used to deliver them. So IoT services are not automatically considered telecom services. It's the underlying connectivity layer, so meaning network, spectrum, the identifiers, they remain within the telecoms regulatory landscape. So this distinction was important because it avoids over-regulation. It ensures that IoT innovation is not unnecessarily constrained, and it still allows us to address risks at the network and connectivity level. And building on that distinction, not every IoT provider requires a telecom license. So licensing is only triggered when specific thresholds in our telecoms law are met. So these include operating a public telecoms network, using telecom frequencies, or providing a telecom service. So in practice, this means that many IoT providers can operate in Bahrain without holding a direct telecom license, provided that they rely on existing licensed networks. This obviously makes it easier for cross-border and regional IoT services to operate. Permanent roaming. Bahrain allows permanent roaming for IoT in principle, subject to certain safeguards, which I will go on to the next slide. But basically, there are no blanket restrictions. Instead, the arrangements are considered more on a case-by-case basis. So these are the safeguards for permanent roaming. Basically, compliance with lawful access requirements, ensuring you have robust security measures, and ensuring that the SIMs are configured for automated machine-to-machine communication rather than human use. And from a data protection perspective, Bahrain did not introduce IoT-specific data rules. So where IoT services involve personal or sensitive personal data, our existing PDPL, so Personal Data Protection Law, would apply. Also, as a TR, we have issued guidelines which are telecom specific, so to help with navigating the personal data protection laws in that sense. Cross-border data transfers are permitted, subject to safeguards, but we have no blanket data or platform localization requirements for IoT. Instead, the focus is on accountability, security, and lawful access. Then, as IoT becomes integral to critical services, trust in networks and devices is essential. So existing network security, resilience, and lawful access obligations apply. So these frameworks are already technology neutral and extend naturally to IoT connectivity where relevant. And in addition to that, we actively encourage the adoption of recognized best practices for IoT services and data. Thank you. That's just a brief overview of our position here in TRA.
Thank you so much. That was perfect overview, just giving an insight on the scope and the specific aspects of the RAINI approach. And now I would like to ask Mohammed, what about the Egyptian framework and how I understand it differs in many ways, but maybe you could give us a bit of an introduction and key policy considerations, key aspects covered, and yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Veronica, and thank Colin colleagues for giving us this opportunity to be part of this great webinar. And good evening to everyone who are attending this event. To give you an overview, just maybe go back to the time where you mentioned that NTRA have issued its first framework for IoT back in 2022. This issuance of this framework came after significant consultations and discussions with all the stakeholders and IoT beneficiaries in Egypt and in some in the region as well, to come with the applicable framework and process for allowing the use of and benefiting from IoT devices and networks. Let me tell you that our main objective from licensing of enabling the IoT components consists of three main components, which is the network operator and IoT service provider and the end user. These are the main three components that our entire framework and processes are built on. So first component is about IoT network operator. It's talking about allowing the network, telecommunication network provider to carry traffic for IoT systems and devices. In this context, we have different network segment, like, for example, LPWAN networks, which would require a specific licensing for having IoT connectivity available. And it's currently under discussion and under preparation, LPWAN licensing framework. And we have also the narrowband IoT connectivity layer, which is already also under development, and it's part of our operators annex. Our mobile network operators themselves have the right to operate and provide connectivity for narrowband IoT like LTM or so. And we have also a connectivity layer for IoT, which is satellite IoT operator. And it's also a part of our satellite operator annex, and it's under development as well. Like, for example, GEO and LEO satellites providing connectivity for IoT networks. And one final connectivity layer, we can have it under the network provisions, which is same-based IoT connectivity under mobile operator network, which is already covered. It's not a new one. It's already covered under our operators' licenses, annexes, which that up till the end of the license itself. These are the previous components consist and compose the network licensing part. The other part, which is the IoT service provider licensing, is about providing the platform and the services of IoT to the end users. These components require licensing from NTRA, and it has been issued since 2022. Maybe around, if I remember correctly, 25 licenses have been issued to IoT service providers in Egypt that have the right to give the end users the IoT services itself, to having the back end in place and provide all the services that can user benefit from. But it should also be, as you understand, the IoT service layer should be based on the IoT connectivity layer. So it should be based on a licensed network operator for IoT. This is basically what comprises the landscape on IoT in Egypt currently. And by the way, if you have all these requirements, when you have a need, as mentioned by Salma, to provide services to the others, if you are going to build a network for your own, to have your own IoT devices and networks, then you don't have a specific license, you just need to follow the standard authorization procedures for different network components and follow any general regulations that would govern these components. Like, for example, if you want specific frequency band that is allowed to be used, then you would follow the existing regulation for this band. The devices should be type approved as normal procedure, like any communication device operating within Egypt should be type approved. You just follow the general guideline and general regulatory procedures if you would build your own network for IoT devices, not to provide services for others. This is the general framework as it exists now in Egypt, as you know. Maybe we'll talk about little bit about permanent roaming, as highlighted by my colleague Salma. Permanent roaming is allowed in Egypt only in the case of connected vehicles, where you would have a approved roaming agreement with the foreign mobile operators. That's where you can use a permanent roaming SIM cards in Egypt. That's generally what we are having now, and this is where we stand as you know. I think you're muted.
You're muted, Veronica. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Thank you for this overview. I think it illustrates very well what we also seen in other regions. Some countries, like Bahrain, they generally focus on the connectivity aspect, and it's the connectivity aspects which is subject to licensing and which generally fits in the context of overall telecommunications authorization licensing regime. On the other hand, we also have countries like Egypt. They've taken more holistic approach. They look across the whole value chain, and then you see that certain rules, regulations, authorization requirements, they literally apply to multiple actors across the value chain. So certain provisions apply to connectivity providers, but then there are also specific authorization requirements for IoT service providers, and maybe if it's a separate role, there could be also some rules for platform providers. So I think our speakers today reflect those differences very well, and maybe just to show what it implies in practice, if we take some common IoT business case, IoT use case, if we look, for example, at connected cars, which is frequently also offered by cross-border service providers, maybe you could briefly just explain what authorization rules would apply in your countries? If you think different providers, like say OEM, who potentially also offers the IoT service and operates the platform, the connectivity provider, maybe other players. Mohammed, would you like to comment first, or shall I give over to?
Yeah, maybe you could give our colleagues a chance, and then I'll come back to you.
Yes.
Veronica. So first of all, let me just say a quick hello. So thank you for setting this discussion up. It's really a pleasure to be able to contribute to this very interesting discussion. As Bahrain, I mean, just to add a bit to what Salma said earlier. As Bahrain, we obviously recognized that the topic of IoT is rapidly changing the way our economies grow, how things are getting connected, how people consume their broadband services, and how things are getting done, basically. Today, there are billions of connected devices which have transformed industries. And as a nation, we had to recognize that. We had to recognize that as part of digital transformation and economic diversification. And we wanted to embrace IoT as a key enabler of innovation and efficiency. So our role in all of this was to make sure that the expansion of connected devices comes with an opportunity, and those opportunities then introduce responsibilities. And those responsibilities for us center predominantly around security, around data privacy, and around interoperability, but also spectrum management. So with regards to your question now about vehicles, isn't it? So it depends on the business model of the operators. So as Salma has explained, there is the concept, of course, of embedded SIM cards, and the embedded SIMs within vehicles. It depends, like I said, on whether the service provider or the vehicle manufacturer wishes to team up with a local service provider, or it has within it an embedded SIM card, which, and as Salma said, we would allow for permanent roaming. Permanent roaming as such, we do not necessarily say no to it. It is on paper allowed. However, we would always encourage manufacturers to team up with local operators. That, of course, as regulators, gives us control over the services that are being provided. It gives control over the security requirements that we have in place. As you may be aware, Bahrain has a SIM card registration regulation, so people need to present the credentials before they can consume and subscribe to a mobile telecommunication service, and those credentials need to be verified. And the same applies for IoT and embedded SIM cards. So when a manufacturer of an IoT device teams up with a local service provider, a local mobile network operator, the same identification, verification, registration requirements would apply. There is a slightly different requirement for embedded SIM cards, but in essence, the gist of it remains the same. So the security organs would need to know who those SIM cards are being subscribed to, and I think Salma, is it the IMSI that needs to be recorded? I forgot which details exactly, but there is a registration requirement. I'm not sure if that answered the question fully, or if there's something else that you needed to know. And you're on mute.
You are still muted.
You've unmuted and muted yourself again.
Oh, sorry about that. No, thank you, Jean-Pierre. It explains very well. It's really what I was looking for, just taking a common use case and just to see in terms of regulatory authorization, registration, what requirements would apply to different players in the value chain. If you take connected vehicles as an example. Mohammed, may I ask you to comment how it compares to the framework we have in Egypt?
Yeah. As already have been highlighted by my colleague Jean-Pierre, I believe the same. We have also worked closely with our beneficiary stakeholders regarding connected vehicles. We have developed the framework as it stands now based on the benefits that our local providers would gain and business opportunity that are existing in the Egyptian market regarding this sort of connected vehicles, which entirely based on having maybe a SIM-based and embedded SIMs, and it's now been introduced in Egypt based on this framework. Generally, as highlighted before, the connected vehicles are allowed to be using permanent roaming, but subject to having an approved roaming agreement between our local operator and the foreign operator from the country where the same is originated. That would allow them to operate. And as already highlighted, if there is a potential that you have a business case on the local providers to give you the SIM card to be used in this connectivity, is also much more preferable, even from financial and point of view, to having a lower cost of operation on these kind of IoT devices. And generally, all the IoT devices are subject to our laws of Data Protection Act, which I believe requiring that all the user data to be localized within the borders of the Egyptian government, the Egyptian territories. These are the general highlights that you can give you about the connected vehicles. I hope as well that answers your question.
I have a follow-up question though. Since we are still discussing connected vehicles, I've seen that recently Egypt actually issued authorizations to 7 major OEMs, which is interesting to me because it illustrates a different approach. I would imagine in Bahrain it wouldn't be required for OEMs to be able to offer their connected vehicles to request a specific license. But in Egypt, I understand they would be subject to provisions that apply to IoT service providers, right? And they had to apply for specific license.
Yeah.
And they also had to be established, incorporated in Egypt. Is it correct?
Yeah. It depends on how you interpret the scope of IoT, because I believe these recent licensees were based on some sort of operation and management of the vehicles themselves, not sort of an IoT system as we speak of, like for any IoT device. So these licensees were focusing on having a sort of operational management for a fleet of cars and localized operation and maintenance for these brands and these car manufacturers, which is sort of a different than we speak about IoT for connected vehicles for traffic management and for something like this.
So in other words, as a connected vehicle, say connected consumer vehicle, as an OEM, you do not specifically need a license to operate, as long as you rely on the services of an authorized connectivity provider.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Another question that comes to my mind, I think we already covered well the aspect of permanent roaming. I understand very well the Egyptian approach, since permanent roaming in general is permissible, but you need the local operator, the local roaming partner needs to register the agreement with the authority. In Bahrain, I understand that there is generally permissible permanent roaming. However, there is a restriction. So as long as the roaming is used for machine-to-machine communications, right? So the question that comes to my mind, how do you actually draw the line? Because again, many of the applications these days, many machine-to-machine in a way is a subset of IoT. And many applications then combine various aspects. If we take connected vehicles as an example, so there are specific services where connectivity is being used just to focus on car maintenance or driver experience. But then there could be also internet provision, like hotspot in the car. How do you distinguish that if it's for example offered based on permanent roaming? Or it has not been on your radar yet?
hasn't been on our radar, but I can tell you that when connected vehicle manufacturers, when manufacturers of cars come to us and ask for authorization, one of the requirements is an undertaking as to what they can and cannot do. And this is one of them, right? Now, you might ask, okay, how can you catch them? Well, we're not in the business of catching people. We're not in the business of necessarily being the forceful hand of the law. But if there is an incident, then we obviously would intervene. We don't pride ourselves in being an interventionist regulator. We usually take a laid back approach in terms of investigating, if you like, potential breaches, and we'll let the market operate. But like I said, the requirements are there, the restriction is there, and obviously if then people complain and it comes to our attention, then that could jeopardize the cars or the car manufacturers' operations in Bahrain. And I don't think it's in anyone's best interest for people to flout the law anyway. So
it's a very pragmatic approach. Thank you. Thank you.
And I must say that we have had instances, not necessarily relating to connected vehicles or IoT, where there has been abuse of Maltese. Sorry, I come from Malta, so sometimes I mix them up. Of Bahraini numbers, which have led to fraud and therefore criminal prosecution. So this is not something that we take lightly anyway.
Mohammed, would you like to comment on that? What happens if IoT service involves some consumer component, like provision of internet access? Is there any different treatment?
Yeah. Any kind of component that would involve let me say that connectivity to public networks or so it would need an investigation, as highlighted by my colleague Jean-Pierre from our regulatory authority, to check for the chain of authorization for this kind of connectivity, and pen testing for the components to be evaluated to check for vulnerabilities and potential threats to be assessed, and then would grant this system, after all these checks have been passed, the final approval from our side.
Thank you. Thank you. One last question from me, and then I would like to give a chance to our audience to address their questions. Just to clarify on data protection and cross-border data transfer, because as we already discussed, all IoT deployments across the world these days, they're being increasingly driven by global providers, by global OEM or global connectivity providers. And in this context, the cross-border data transfers, they're also becoming increasingly important. But on the other hand, we also have very strong data protection, privacy concerns, data sovereignty concerns. So how do you see frameworks in your countries evolving when it comes to cross-border data and data sharing across borders?
So if I may perhaps answer this one. Bahrain has, of course, a general personal data protection law, as I'm already indicated. We also have a sector-specific regulation for data protection and data privacy. Within our framework, which follows similar GDPR anyway, there is a list of approved countries, and mercifully for us, so far, the manufacturers of the vehicles who have requested permission to employ connected vehicles are all on the approved list. So with that being said, the flow of personal data and the flow of and data flows, therefore, is not has not been problematic so far. We have yet to be faced with the question of what if someone from not on that list, what happens? And I mean, taking now my TRA hat off and being purely legal person, then I would say that probably shouldn't happen, unless that country or the operator within that country is, or the data processor in that country, convinces his government or his country or whatever, so that then that country comes on the list of approved nations for Bahrain. So in essence, so far it has not been an issue, only because the data protection framework in Bahrain already covers for the transfer of personal data to approved countries.
Thank you. Mohammed, I know you have more stricter rules in Egypt, where everything has to be kept within the country.
Let's not say it's restrictive. We have a certain an overlay Personal Data Protection Act in Egypt, which is Act 151, that govern all the aspects of data exchange and transfer and protection, that govern all our frameworks and licenses, which basically say that all the IoT system components and data storage should be within the borders of Egypt for maintaining and it doesn't allow for the traffic of the IoT data to be cross borders to another countries. That's the mandate of our data protection acts, basically, which what drive all the use cases and the licenses that have been we talked about to you when for the service provider of IoT, which is working perfectly for our Egyptian market as we speak now. We didn't see much need, or maybe there is not much problems from these kind of cross-border data transfer as being needed.
Thank you. Muatasem, would you like to comment before we move over to questions and answers? Would you like to give more sort of your helicopter view on from regional perspective, like what we see, how the situation in two countries compares to the rest of the region? You're muted, just like me.
Okay, yes. Thank you, Veronica. So actually, we covered a lot of aspects now, so I will try to go very briefly on the situation, like in general, overview of the situation in the region. For example, on the authorization requirements, it is mainly related to connectivity. From what I noticed from our research, that in all the countries, the traffic that is related to IoT service provision or to IoT platforms and systems should be somehow carried by national operator that have a license. This also includes the permanent roaming. The traffic is actually carried by a local operator. So for the connectivity part, I believe we can say that the traffic should be carried in all the cases by licensed operators in all the countries. In some countries, they have more strict rules, like in the UAE, they require the IoT provider to register their services with the telecom regulator. For instance, also in Jordan, the IoT system should be also approved by the telecom regulator. This is like in general for the authorization. On the permanent roaming, there are mainly three cases. It's either allowed or not regulated, which is mainly the case in the North African countries. In Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco, the permanent roaming is not regulated at all, and it's left completely for the telecom operators to decide whether to provide it or not. The second option is to allow it, but with restrictions, as we see in the cases of Bahrain and in Egypt. But also, it's the same in Jordan. It can only be used within an IoT platform that is approved by the telecom regulator in United Arab Emirates in general. The main rule that it is allowed, but since the IoT service itself requires a registration with the telecom regulator, so I would say it's a bit also restricted. The third model is to completely prohibit the permanent roaming, which is the case in Saudi Arabia and in Turkey. Both countries has like limited the IoT SIM cards roaming to 120 days. After that, the service should be like the SIM card should be provided with a local SIM card profile from a local provider, licensed operator, or the service will stop completely. I mentioned 120 days for Turkey and Saudi Arabia, but there is also 90 days threshold in Oman and in Qatar. It's restricted in Oman. To provide permanent roaming, you have 90 days. After that, you need to have approval from TRA, the telecom regulator, if you wish to continue providing the service using the 90 days, and this should be justified to TRA. In Qatar, the general rule that the roaming for IoT is limited to 90 days, but it's also left to the operators to decide if they wish to continue providing the service for longer periods and for permanent. The third topic we tackled was the data flows. In general, there are rules that are applicable, general rules like the personal data protections, as Jean-Pierre and Mohammed mentioned. Applies also to IoT, but also there is in many countries like in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, in Jordan, there are rules for the cloud service providers, and those will per se apply to IoT as well. Some kind of sensitive data, let's say government data, healthcare data, which can also be part of IoT data. They cannot be transferred or processed outside the country, so they should be stored within the country. Some countries have some additional restrictions. I can say examples from Jordan and Oman. They require not only the data, but also the component of the IoT platform itself should be also within the borders of the country, which is even more restricted. In Jordan, there are exceptions if it is justified to use parts or components cross borders. The fourth thing that we slightly talk about it is SIM card registration. In general, the same general SIM card registrations apply to mobile services, also apply to IoT SIM cards in all the countries. In some countries, there are some additional requirements related to IoT devices, whether they use the SIM cards or not. I can recall Jordan has such requirements, and the OEE, they need to know the type of IoT service, the device, what kind of service can be provided through the IoT. Is it personal communications or machine to machine? So this is in general the situation on all the topics that we tackled in the discussion with our guests. This is like a general overview of the regions, and that's it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shall we move over to questions from our audience?
Yes, we have quite some questions actually, so we will try to answer as many as possible, and as usual, we will try to answer those we don't take during the session by email. Just quickly before we move on to Q&A, I just wanted to mention that we just published great research on connected cars and their regulatory treatment, and we will also publish more on cross-border data transfer this year, so stay tuned. I would say, well, we always say that because there's always a lot coming up, so well, really stay tuned. And now let's move quickly to the questions from the audience, and let's start maybe with the forward-looking question. So if we look ahead in 5 years, how do you see IoT policy evolving in your region? Should international providers prepare for more localization of infrastructure and data, or do you foresee increased regional harmonization? I don't know who wants to jump first. Or maybe Mohammed or Salma.
Okay, if you would like me to get this one. Yeah. Okay. If you take a forward look, I would say that you already have mentioned it, that more sort of arrangement for data localization, especially with the evolvement of artificial intelligence, where these all kind of booming technology is like will be rising with the uptake of IoT and would capitalize on IoT. So that would give us maybe a more incentives to make progressive steps to make use of the AI itself for the sake of the countries and for the sake of all the services and government-related activities and applications, like, for example, critical infrastructure and smart grids and smart cities, or all these kind of use cases and application would significantly require much more investment in the IoT infrastructure, where it should be within a localized context and for to make applicable use of these cases, sort of. That's how I see it from my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you,
I
Mohammed.
think that, sorry, I was going to say that this question reminds me a bit of a question that I was asked perhaps a couple of years ago on data protection and how do I see data protection evolving, the framework at least evolving in the region. And in that paper, sorry, in that discussion, which led to a paper, and also in this discussion, I would say that we need to see a bit more harmonization. Because the way I see it is that all the countries, at least in most of the countries, as the example between Bahrain and Egypt, perhaps the approach is a bit fragmented, not necessarily the same. So I think there needs to be perhaps greater regional coordination on issues such as licensing and roaming and SIM requirements, so that cross-border IoT becomes a bit easier for manufacturers. I also think that there will be a greater emphasis on cybersecurity. Not today that there isn't, but I think it will become increasingly more important. Data protection is obviously key, and so too is resilience. I think with the increase in data flows and cloud and edge computing, these three kind of principles or developments will lead to convergence of IoT, and they will help shape the IoT, at least the regulatory priorities and frameworks for IoT within the region and hopefully globally as well.
Thank you both. I'm just speeding up because we don't have much time left, and we have here a question from a participant from Ireland, asking what measures are taken with regard to KYC for the IoT. For instance, if someone tries to use prepaid SIM on an IoT solution without clear ownership, what would be the measures taken? I don't know. I don't know who the question was for, but if you want to reply, just go for it.
I didn't.
I'm not sure I understand the question, to be honest.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe the participant was the question could perhaps just specify a bit more, and then we move on to the next question. Maybe a question for Veronica and Watasem. So will there be other countries of the region addressed by Cullen in a similar webinar? Just asking. I think our coverage will increase in the service anyway, but I'm not sure we will have other webinars. Well, perhaps we will have, but I don't know when. Or Veronica, what to say if you want to comment?
Well, definitely, as we continue exploring more topics and regions, definitely we will try to bring some other countries next time. On the previous question, just maybe we could ask the participants to resend it to us, and we could provide a more comprehensive answer.
It will be by email, because now we are really running out of time. So we promise to send some information by email. And yeah, I think now we will quickly wrap up. I really thank our guest for today. I think it was really interesting. And thank you also to all participants who joined us from really everywhere around the globe. So it was again a very interesting topic and very interesting content around IoT.
Sarah,
And
maybe just before you kick us off, if I may just to say something, how it links to our previous webinars and how it relates to what Jean-Pierre just said. Essentially, when we are talking IoT in Europe, again, most of our participants have joined the view that there is a need from a global provider perspective. There is definitely more scope for harmonization, for more consistency. Hopefully we'll see it in Europe, at least with some of the Commission's proposals that were released recently when it comes to authorization requirements and so on. But for region, of course, it's more of a question of political will and coordination. It's difficult for us, for me and Motasem, to comment on that. It's more up to countries, of course.
If I may say one thing, that we are glad that we have Bahrain and Egypt today, but actually our research, as I mentioned in my opening presentation, we cover 13 countries in the Middle East and North Africa region, and our coverage extends to other regions like Europe, Asia, Pacific, Americas, and Africa. So yeah, so we have a lot of content. I'm not sure what regions are or which countries are exactly required, but we cover so many other countries, and I think it would.
And do not hesitate to contact us if you wanted to explore more our research.
Yeah, I was about to say that before and wrap up, because now we really need to leave our esteemed guests to the rest of their days. And yeah, well, thank you everyone once again. Stay tuned for future events as usual. And don't forget about the feedback. We really need it, and that's more trees for the planet. So that's always good. Mohamed, Salma, Jean-Pierre, thank you so much. And we keep in touch in any case, and we will keep following many countries. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.